Hello and welcome back to A Better World. This is your host, Mitchell J. Rabin, and I'm very glad you're joining us again today. Today, before the end of this year, I wanted to have my dear friend and colleague, Alan Steinfeld, join me on A Better World. Alan was part of the early days of A Better World and has gone on to do his own show for which he's become very well known. He's doing an awesome job in what he calls New Realities. And New Realities is both a radio and television show that is largely about subjects of the interface and exploration of science and spirituality and healing. And Alan has been himself an acupuncturist and involved in the healing arts for many years, as well as in the exploration of all forms of healing and consciousness and spirituality. And he's really become a great spokesperson for these incredibly important domains as we move into the future. And as you know, on A Better World, these are the kinds of voices we really like to bring forward, people who are doing things, are speaking about the creation of a better world and of a new reality, and bringing forward a different kind of consciousness on this planet is so obvious that it's long overdue, and it looks like it may actually be part of our planetary DNA to bring it forward and have it brought forward, both where the actual authorship is of the bringing will be one of the questions that we discuss today on this show. But we are definitely going to be looking at the subject of a shift in consciousness, collective, planetary in nature, and beyond, and see where we are with that and what we can do to further midwife this shift from where we are now and where we have been into a new kind of future. So with that, Alan Steinfeld, welcome back to A Better World.
Welcome back. Have I been on your show recently?
You know what? I just realized that when I did an interview with Drunvalo Melchizedek in October of 1998, why I remember these things, don't ask, but Drunvalo was available for about 20 minutes at the Armenian Church on 34th Street and 2nd Avenue, and I asked you to sit in for the rest of that interview, and we finished it up.
I don't remember that so well.
Do you remember that? Yes. So you're walking in the big shoes of Drunvalo.
I just saw Drunvalo recently in Sedona. He's doing very interesting. He has a huge following with the sacred geometry.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone thinks he invented sacred geometry, and it's been around for thousands of years. But he's still doing his.
He's still doing his thing. No, I know. I'm aware. I didn't see him when I was in Sedona last, but I was invited to a party that was on the tail end of a 4-day opening the heart workshop that he had done. Offered in the same space that I was doing my intensive writing workshop. So it was good to feel the vibes of all of the Drunvalo students. It was great. But Alan, so in fact you were on A Better World, but, not just that, you've been, behind the scenes and behind the camera for A Better World for a long time. And, you were just always a really good friend and
you inspired
supporter.
Me because you weren't actually asking the questions I would ask, so you inspired me. I got to get my own show to ask the questions I want to ask.
Exactly.
And,
that's right, exactly.
But I have been an observer of consciousness like you for the past, 30 years? We've been dabbling in all the realms, including Chinese medicine and consciousness and biology.
All of the so-called classic modalities, classic for us, which are largely Eastern modalities of, as you say, we both happen to be acupuncturists. We've both gone through the training in Chinese energetics. We're both quite familiar with homeopathy. We're both quite familiar with Ayurvedic medicine and Vedic astrology.
Right,
yeah.
But what all this is pointing toward is a shift in how we understand who we are and what the body's about, right?
Exactly.
That's what all these things, that's why we're interested in those things, along with a whole, I would say, subculture of people looking for answers that aren't provided in the mainstream, and slowly they're emerging that there are other ways of looking at the body. I mean, we're both big fans of Bruce Lipton. We had lunch with him when he was in town last, and people like Bruce are presenting the integration of the mind, body, and the spirit. That's what the science of the future looks like. That's what the shift is looking like. It's no longer a question, is there a shift in consciousness? We say there is a shift in consciousness, and what is that about? And what I say it's about new realities. And what that means is that we are thinking differently about the nature of reality. Reality is not the same as it was, last year or 20 years ago or 100 years ago.
That's right. And what I mean by that is, what were you saying? No, please go on.
Oh, no. I'm just saying what I mean by that, it's not that the world essentially has changed. It's that the human potential is making itself available to a broader spectrum of awareness.
So, that's a very good point. Now, wouldn't you also say that a lot of the shift that's taking place is greater access, interestingly, to the scientific languaging of our experience and supporting our intuitions about what is reality, so to speak, in ways that we never had access to before. We were all, because of the bifurcation of spirituality and science many, many moons ago, really in the West, we kind of got weaned away from our own intuitive knowing, and science, in the sense, is circling back to support our own original thinking. And, Joe Dispenza, Alan, said that that science is the contemporary language of mysticism. And I think that's a really brilliant point, because it allows us to be confirmed in our knowing that we have felt for a long time. And let me just circle to one other thing that I know you're working on, although I want to hear you comment on that, is your work. You're beginning to film a project regarding indigenous wisdom and the elders across the planet, and always a very important subject to me. And in a way, it's interesting that our language is changing, and yet the knowledge was always known. Could you speak to that?
Exactly. Thank you. That's a very good question and has many parts. First, addressing the idea of science is that it was really the quantum revolution that opened the way to consciousness, and they realized in the early experiments of quantum physics that the observer affected the experiment. So if the observer affected the experiment, then where was the objective reality? And maybe there was no objective reality, and this is what the revolution in science, as well as art in a way, and I mean abstract painting came in at the same time, and a lot of revolutions of perception came in at that time. But we'll just talk to science. And science no longer could be defined as an objective measure of the world. It was based on who was looking at it. The collapsing of the wave function meant that our intention was part of the experiment. So the objectivity that science still likes to think it has was thrown out the window and opened the door to the valuing of the subjective experience. So part of this, what I call new realities, is the idea that there is no such thing as objective reality. No one can tell you that your experience wasn't true, wasn't right, wasn't real, although science will, from old science, Newtonian science, will tell you, no, it's impossible to see what you saw, or see a UFO, or see a ghost, or feel chi even, and the subjective realities of our experiences are what we're looking for a greater confirmation, and then the quantum physics came along and said, no, your subjective reality is the reality. There is no objective truth, and there's no one to measure it because they have to include themselves in the measurement of it. So that was a huge shift in
understanding and of both understanding and potentiality in the same breath, actually.
Yes,
you're reminding me.
And that gave power back to the individual. It gave power back to. First of all, we realized that Western science, the objective reality, hit a dead end. They hit a wall, and they splattered all over that wall, and they couldn't put together the pieces again because there were no pieces because they didn't exist in the first place. So
exactly. But wait a minute. But to make a distinction, I wanted to make a distinction because it's I think it's useful. But first of all, I do want to quote something I'm reminded of in listening to you speak beautifully about the nature of the subjective. I studied neurolinguistic programming with one of its founders, Richard Bandler, many moons ago, and one of the things he used to reference all the time was the primacy of the subjective. And I thought that was such a beautiful way of putting it because it was empowering for people to begin to trust and enjoy their own sensory experience without saying that it was, in a sense, demoted or lesser than some kind of objective reality. And as you well put it, science did hit a wall, and it found out that there ain't such thing. However, within that, I do want to say this, that Newtonian, the interpretation of reality, according to Newton, and even helped along a bit by Descartes, allowed us to actually materialize amazing technologies like cars, like airplanes, and build the clock, everything mechanical in the so-called mechanical universe does come to us from that perspective of reality. And
that
of course,
was
as you're
a phase
suggesting,
of our development. We needed to go through those
it's a very useful phase. But I think it's important to realize that it's a subset, and a very useful subset, of the larger quantum reality, which is bringing us to a whole new place that you keep pointing toward, of a breakthrough in subjective consciousness that is going to really kind of lift us off, if you will, liberate us from the simple Newtonian perspective.
Well, it was when you climb a ladder, we go for a rung, and that rung pulls you up, and you know what? You have to let go of that rung if you're going to keep going further. You have to let go of what got you there in order to achieve a higher level. So mechanistic, Newtonian, Cartesian paradigms, although Newton was an alchemist and Descartes had a vision of an angel, and that just sort of set the foundation of something that was different from all of that, just to go back with a little history, if you know that. Right. And so leaving the mechanistic world of the objective realities, and we're starting to redefine.
Well, it's so-called objective. I would use the phrase borrowed from Buddhist science and psychology. It's relatively objective. But the point that you're making, that we're making, is there is no absolute objectivity. There's only relative objectivity in our world.
Well, no, but they being these mainstream science, is still telling people there's an objective reality. This is how it is. And, the mainstream's always at least 20 or 30 years behind those other people that are at the cutting edge. And so what I'm saying is, and if there is only subjective realities, there's only your idea of what's true, your vision of potentiality, then what's true? Well, and what measurements do we have to judge who we are by? And what I'm saying is there is none. There are no standards anymore. They've gone out the window. So, and that has to do with one key subject it all comes down to, I think, about the nature of reality of itself, and that's one main science that now has been, let's call it, corrupted. And you know what that is, Mitchell?
I'm curious. Archaeology?
Okay. No, close. No, psychology.
Psychology.
Psychology has taken, in the old form, a linear, in a way, redefine us in objective terms where essentially psychology is a subjective science. But if we go along with the mainstream, you have to think a certain way, and you have to do this. And if you don't fit the objective mold of a normal human being, you're thrown in prison or you're given drugs. And now look at all those kids. I mean,
Well,
5 or 6 years old, I would be hyperactive. I don't know what I'd be, full of awful drugs they give kids.
Yeah, you're talking about the co-opting of what is a beautiful study, the study of psyche, and psyche. Psyche comes, of course, from the ancient Greek psyche, which means sacredness of mind is really what it means. The psyche is also the soul. It's an entirely different perspective than what we refer to as psychology today. Psychology today has been co-opted by both the medical world. So we get, as you were saying, we have this nomenclature where people are healthy and people are ill, and God knows what we would be considered from that point of view, and it's been co-opted by an economic and a political system. So we're not really dealing with psychology. We're dealing with a prostituted, corrupted form of it. But what you're suggesting is we're restoring and we're upgrading psychology to a nonlinear quantum physical reality, which, interestingly, a science, I would say neuroscience, is actually helping to nourish.
Yes, neuroscience is very important. It's a key element because it functions on a quantum level. But what I also think this renovation of psychology does is take us out of the box of how we're supposed to think, the standard mode. And it was the psychedelic revolution that really broke ground. I remember Timothy Leary saying, they don't want you to think differently. That's the reason LSD is illegal, because it makes you think thoughts that you would normally think. And people, get disturbed if you're thinking something that they're not thinking. And so he called it the thought police, was restricting thought. But anyway, it's too late for that, because the whole idea is...
sure. It's out of the genie. It's out of the bottle. It's God. Yeah. Timothy Leary also in his research showed that another reason that LSD was made illegal is because it helped people to question authority. And God forbid that should happen. And, of course, Robert Anton Wilson in The Cosmic Trigger and his other writings, the Illuminati Trilogy, etc., went, really full tilt on looking at these aspects of the psychedelic experience and how incredibly mind-expanding it was. And, no, you're totally right. I feel like it very much got initiated there.
Yeah, no, questioning authority means you're not thinking the way we've been told to think. And what that did was open up the mind to a spiritual revolution, saying that, okay, there's more to me than what I've been told to think. And if I have a new thought, or if I have certain forms of experience that don't fit in the box, maybe I'm not crazy. So for a long time, people thought they were crazy if they had thoughts that didn't fit into the realm that they were supposed to think. But now, with the whole advent of, I would call, channeling, which I sort of grew up on, the fact that people can access a non-local consciousness that appears to be separate from their own psyche. I mean,
and you don't mean channel 2 and 4.
No, I mean channel you. I mean if consciousness is non-local, and what we are, and according to Bruce Lipton, even, is that we're receivers. And maybe we can switch our channel and receive a different frequency. And, of course, now the whole near-death experience, which is also a sort of revolution with people like Eben Alexander, who was a neuroscientist, says he was brain dead, yet he had experience. So, and, of course, his doctors, his colleagues, but he says, it's a phenomenon of the mind and all that. And so what we're coming up against is redefining the old paradigm in new ways. You see, in the old paradigm, those experiences were all aspects of the psyche, of the mind, and what the redefinition of that means is, no, we are greater than our mind. The psyche itself extends beyond the body. And as a matter of fact, one of my favorite quotes of Edgar Cayce, he says, people questioning, is there a life after death and what happens to consciousness? He said the real question is not how much does consciousness survive the body, but how much does that great consciousness survive the birth of the body, meaning that we're so expanded. Not how much that consciousness survives the death of the body, it's how much that expanded consciousness survives in the body. You see what I mean?
Yes.
It's like we are the vast expanded consciousness.
We are the consciousness, and the body is a temporary little blip on the screen of our, eternal existence.
Right, but because of the programming of the body, that expanded consciousness has to be contracted and confined.
That's right. Delimited.
A social reality, and that's the problem
we're having,
is that we're breaking out, and that's what really the work of New Realities is about, is breaking out of a socially confined reality, and what's his name talks about this a lot, Joseph Chilton Pierce. He was a big influence on what I'm really trying to do.
Yes,
he says,
indeed.
Yes, reality cannot be conformed to one person's idea, and so that was the crack in the cosmic egg of the book he wrote in the 1960s, is that we need to break out of culture. Culture has been our trap. Of course, even Terence McKenna would say, culture is not your friend. I love that quote.
Right.
Culture is not your friend because culture wants you to be just like everything else. We have to become acultural, ahistorical, creative beings whose thoughts don't look like anybody else's if we're going to evolve out of the mess that we created from the limited, linear, Newtonian, mechanistic, Darwinian, Cartesian paradigm. We have to do something different.
Exactly. We have to step out of that. It's the way Eckhart Tolle would put it is that we are in the stream. Our consciousness is spent typically within the stream of time. But when we stop in letting our mechanistic mind run the show and become conscious of the present moment, that is a moment, in a sense, really outside of time, outside of that stream, and we become, in a sense, we become forever. We become in touch with our eternal conscious nature at that moment, and we're free from the time-space continuum which ages us and which perpetuates a habituated mental state. Let's let everybody know that you are listening to Better World with Mitchell J. Rabin. We're on every Wednesday at 6 p.m., and this time we're doing a pre-record, so in fact any of you listening would be hearing it on Monday at 6 p.m. as well. And if you don't yet get our newsletter, which lists all of our shows every week, the TV show at 7 on Mondays, the weekly radio show, Progressive Film Hour with Mitchell Rabin on Tuesdays at 3, and, of course, A Better World at 6 on Wednesdays. Get our newsletter. It's free. It's at abetterworld.tv. We love to have you part of A Better World community. And my guest today, Alan Steinfeld, has been part of that community for a long time, as I've been part of his. And we're talking about the exploration of consciousness and stepping out of the stream of time and looking at the places we may go multidimensionally, accessing different types of intelligence as we move along the path of frequencies in our larger, energized, intelligent universe. Alan, it's a pleasure to have you on and to talk. Yes?
Yeah, but what you just said about stepping out of the stream of time and accessing our multidimensional body, that is not new news to human consciousness. That is what the indigenous wisdom is all about, and that's why I'm going to Australia in February to document what this cycle of time. I'm doing a film that I'm creating called Human Destiny, the cycles of time, with Robert Lawler, who's a real genius of a human being, a scholar, a mystic. He wrote Sacred Geometry, but he also wrote a book called The Voices of the First Day about Australian Aborigines, and that book was really accepted as a true document of their history, and they are the oldest continuous civilization on planet Earth. They existed 100,000 years ago in basically the same form that they're in now. And they were never agriculturists. They knew how to plant, but they were hunters and gatherers because they felt by planting crops, you were enslaving the earth and you were enslaved to time. So by wandering and letting their walkabouts direct their movements, they were able to maintain a wisdom that connected them back to the earth in a more, I think, integral way. And part of their basic wisdom is saying this world is being dreamed by us, and we have to create a dream. I mean, behind any physical reality is the dream of that reality. And they knew that, and they knew they were outside of time, and they knew that they were just incarnating here to be caretakers of the earth itself. So all these New Age philosophies that we think are so revolutionary are part of the Native American traditions, the sacred traditions and we think these people were primitive, but they weren't primitive. They're very sophisticated in their awareness. I mean, they have the same brains we have. Their awarenesses are different, and the key to human destiny, I think, or at least I'm proposing in this film, is to connect us back to indigenous wisdom. It's what Joseph Campbell said. He said it's not technology that's going to save the world, it's intuition. And so I'm starting an Indiegogo campaign. People can go to my website. They could donate money to help sponsor this film on human destiny and this trip.
Beautiful.
To
What's your give the website? They
can go to right now. The Indiegogo campaign will be up on my website this week, but they can go to newrealities.com and make a donation about this upcoming film project. So I think if we return, you see, we're coming to an end of a cycle, right? It's obvious.
Yes.
And it's like a circle. A circle ends where it began. That's what makes it a circle. When we come back around to where we started and we're missing the beginning, we don't have a future. But if we come back around and remember the wisdom that these people never forgot, we have a better shot at cycling forward into a new realm, into maintaining a future, a dreaming future, and not the destruction that this civilization, the destructive path that this civilization seems to be on. I think it was.
I want to just say that I appreciate very much what you're saying, and I'm also doubly pleased to hear of your interest in the indigenous wisdom. It's something that I've been deeply steeped in, really, from teenagehood, when I first actually came across a book with a foreword by Marlon Brando on the Native people. In fact, he was a major advocate of
I remember when there was a Native American woman who accepted his Academy Award. You remember that?
Yeah, exactly. He was a major advocate. And it wasn't so much that it was him. It was the first time I personally became exposed to what were the horrors that were perpetrated on our native peoples here by U.S. government, blah, blah, blah. But what I got in touch with even, much more deeply is the, what we could refer to, of course, as indigenous wisdom of them and of peoples across the world. And I spend a lot of my life really looking at and reflecting on that wisdom and how it relates to today's, contemporary modernistic world. In fact, as you know, Alan, I brought A Better World in conjunction with an organization, folks, that Alan and I are both part of, FIONS, the Friends of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. We co-hosted a gentleman named David Christopher, who wrote an utterly beautiful book that I don't think that you've really delved into deep, but I would really recommend it, called The Holy Universe, because it talks exquisitely and very intelligently about the interface and confluence of ancient wisdom and knowing with our modern Western, largely left hemisphered knowing. And that there really is a rather beautiful place for a marriage between the two to keep each other in balance and harmony. And in other words, enjoy the fruits of each. It's not, and I really like to say this, I probably enjoyed the book because I've been saying something like that for a long time. It's not one or the other, but there's some intelligent integration of what we have created, because we're indigenous people as well, and the ancient wisdom, like that the Dogon understood and recognized Sirius, the dog star Sirius, 10,000 years ago. How in the world did that happen? Or, as you say about the Aborigines.
They knew, they had the intuitive awareness of what the truth was, and no one told them. There was no objective science to say it wasn't true. But there is a science to intuition, as the SRI remote viewers found out. There's a science.
Yes.
All these people in the so-called spiritual New Age are just discovering what we've already known all along.
What we've already known, exactly. I mean, that's why it's a little bit of a yawn for me to see all of these people popping up as though they've come up with, the newest thing since sliced bread, and I kind of go, oh, please. You know how many thousands of years ago, years you're late?
You also have to acknowledge, in a sense, that it's okay. At least it's different than the mainstream, right? So
yes, it is.
Come up with,
by all means. By all means, and not only that, who are we to judge who it is that's going to learn what when? Everybody is on their own. You talk about cycles. Everybody is on their own individuational path, as Jung would call it, and have to make these discoveries of connecting the dots, both linear and non-linearly. So in reality, there's no judgment. It's just there's a moment of, finally, thank God, more people are getting that ancient wisdom is real wisdom and intelligence and technology. I mean, just as a funny example that you might appreciate, Alan, I was speaking to somebody about a new battery, a saltwater battery that runs in perpetuity. Well, in the same conversation where this inventor was telling me about what he's come up with, he said also in the same breath, by the way, did you know that in ancient Egyptian culture, they had a saltwater battery? It's indicated in their hieroglyphs. So,
you can actually
we have a new...
see that at the Metropolitan Museum of Art if you go to the Egyptian wing at the side of the Temple of Dendor, they're holding these things, these hieroglyphic images are holding these things that look like batteries that are producing an electrical charge. They're pouring this electrical charge. If you go to the side of the temple there at the Met in New York City, you'll see these electrical charges there. And I know, and everyone says, oh, that's water, but it's obviously not water because they're pouring things into something that's not below, but it kind of is off at a distance. Anyway, it's evidence that they did have some kind of, I would say, primitive
electrical. They were able to manage electricity in some form.
Oh,
exactly.
In some form,
and but that you're pointing out a certain kind of hubris of our contemporary society, that we are the summit of all that has gone before, and on some unconscious level perhaps, but to make the discovery that there have been societies way long ago, like you were saying. I thought the Aborigines went back 40 to 50,000, but that it goes back 100,000 years is just awesome information.
Yeah.
That's just incredible.
And,
but we have to really make space for the fact that our ancestors they had a certain purity. They didn't have the same pollution and contamination of GMOs and everything else that we have today. Their consciousness was probably clearer.
We got lost in time. We started to chase time. We started to chase this thing of this limited existence. We forgot who we were.
Exactly.
We forgot that we were immortal essences that transcend time and space. And if once that's forgotten, then, the world is up for grabs, and it becomes like a game of greed and not one of preservation or ecology at all. It becomes who has
sustainability.
Really
exactly. No, you put it beautifully. It's a clamping down on the time-space. It's a clamping down on the time-space continuum, which has at its base a profound sense of loss, of question of who I am, and of self-worth. So no wonder you get the acquisitive, materialistic, greed-based societies that we have, because nobody knows who they are. They don't identify with their eternal, intelligent nature. That's what I hear you saying.
Exactly.
I think it's a very well-made point.
Idea is, I think we are here. I think technology is a good thing. I think within the context of a global civilization, interesting enough, when Marshall McLuhan used the term global village in the 1960s, nobody had any idea what he was talking about. Now, it's like, your grandmother down the street knows exactly how to connect to the global village. And so
she goes to Google.
We are living in a global village. We do have the technology and the resources to feed the planet. We have capabilities of free energy. I know you're involved with that. And if we had free energy and we had the freedom to think what we wanted to, then what would be our currency of exchange? What do you think it would be, Mitchell?
Frankly, the currency of exchange, I really think that it would probably be just on the material level, it would be barter. I don't think that we would be really using money.
Beyond barter, I guess, in a way it is. I would say creativity, the creative force. What is your creativity? What can you share of your creative potential with me that increases my awareness? I think creativity is the currency of the future. In a way it is now. Creative people are being rewarded for their genius. But if everyone had the chance, because everyone is a genius, like Joe Dispenza usually says.
Definitely.
He says, hello, geniuses. But we're all geniuses. When we tap into what it is that we are here to create, then the world will evolve even faster. We come into a harmony. We come into I think, a utopian civilization. At least that's my vision, when we transcend the greed and the corruption and the objective views of reality, and let people focus on their individual expressions. It will increase all of us. You know, even the way a good song or a good movie expands our own sense of feeling. If that was the currency, if that was the means of exchange, of expansion, then we live in a whole different world. You know, I think we can
agree with
there.
you. This is you're outlining, first of all, just to underscore the point about creativity in exchange and ancient wisdom. You know, part of the Native American perspective has always been that we were all born with a gift, and that's a gift of one form or another of creativity. Some people are really good with their hands. Some people are really good with their minds. Some people are really powerful with their heart. Some people with all of them. You know, some people can sing. Some people dance. Some people create with crafts. Some people farm. What have you, and everyone in the community comes forward with their own creative talents, their own gifts to the total, to the group. And so in that way, I'm just saying that to kind of corroborate your comment about creativity and the indigenous wisdom.
It comes down to what, you know, someone who's been your teacher recently, Michael Cotton, calls the sixth epoch. And the sixth epoch is this next stage of our evolutionary collective awareness. And it has to do, of course, with opening up the prefrontal cortex so we can access those creative modes.
Well, and the opening up of the prefrontal cortex actually leads to the opening up of the neuroreceptor sites in the heart and the heart chakra, as well as the pineal and pituitary glands. Do you know?
Right, and when the heart is open,
it reaches down deep. Yeah.
Yes, the empathy, the feeling capacity,
compassion
that we have towards each other become the mode of being on the planet itself for humanity. And then we have an empathic civilization.
Civilization and to underscore the other point that keeps showing up here is that civilization has been here many times before. It's not like the first time. It's like the millionth time, you know? It's just a rediscovery, or as some will refer, a remembering of those aspects of us that have gone unconscious that are getting activated again. And that brings me to another question that I'd really like to ask you, because I know you've spent a good amount of time on doing shows on both your radio and TV shows, Alan, on UFO and extraterrestrial type of intelligence and other kinds of inquiries. From that larger point of view, what is your sense of the cycle that we're obviously coming out of a kind of this mechanistic one where everything is linear, etc., and what do you see as the time frame of our entering the new quantum space, of the new cycle of the higher consciousness?
That's good. That's a good question. I'm glad you brought that in, because I'll be hosting the Contact in the Desert program in Joshua Tree this May. We had 2,000 people out there looking for ships. With one of the best speakers. We had about 50 speakers, researchers on the UFO phenomena. And, you know, I'll quote John Mack, who was a Harvard psychiatrist, taught at the Harvard School of Psychiatry. You know who John Mack is, right? And he got into this whole idea of UFO abductions and ETs, and he said, and then he realized these people he was talking to who had these experiences, they weren't crazy. They were just referencing a reality that was outside the mainstream. So he had this whole lawsuit. Harvard said, you can't say there are ETs here. And he goes, well, seems like that's what's going on. And so Harvard tried to fire him. He fought it. He won. And he says in his book, wrote 2 books on the subject, Abduction and also Passport to the Cosmos, and he says that throughout human history, the idea that we were connected to other beings and other star systems was the majority of the way people thought. It's just in the last 100 years that these what we call objective views that say we are the accidental creations of this lonely existence is how it is. But that is a minority view within the history of human civilization. That is not what goes on, and the indigenous, wisdom knows this. They call
and
them
understanding exactly. All of the ancient thinkers had, like, the Taoist cosmology. Oh my God, it reaches deep down and deep into the core of the earth and up toward the heavens to a place that, it just doesn't stop. I mean, I'm teaching a workshop these days, Alan, called Heaven on Earth Seminars a couple times a month, and we look at many of these subjects, so we're getting more and more in touch with our multidimensional reality and looking at our perception and the way it operates.
Well, what do you mean by multidimensional? What do you mean by multidimensional?
What I mean by that is that we are simultaneously occupying a physical space, which is essentially a condensed version of the life force, the chi that essentially runs the universe. That is just a form of intelligence. It's been concentrated. We have concentrated it down into what we refer to as our physical body. But at the same time, like what has emerged from the beautiful experiences that are reported by people who are about to lose their body in this thing we refer to as death, which, the more you see and the more you learn, the more you see that there is no death whatsoever. I've exchanged the word death for disintegration and reintegration, and that's of a bodily sort. But the consciousness continues. We have stories the other side. Even if you look at Buddhist science and psychology, you see there's this whole notion of the wheel of life and of birth and death, not of life, but of birth and death. And when you see that's just one aspect of the living consciousness of the great luminosity, you go, whoa, where is it and what is it with which I identify my consciousness with? And we do that, of course, mainly with our bodies. But I believe that there are, when I say multidimensional, we are living in a sense, in parallel universes.
Parallel
with other aspects of our consciousness.
All right, so you asked me about the timetable, and I'll go back to this one of my favorite interviews with Bruce Lipton, who I posted on YouTube that has tens of thousands of hits, called Fractal Evolution. And so he says in this time frame, in the cycle of evolution, inside time, we go from the one to the many to the one. So he says that, individual cells came together to form colonies of cells, from the single cell. And then from the colony, they became a multicellular organism. So they became a singularity. But they were a many coming together to form a singularity. And then those colonies of cells that became the singularity became organs for more complex cells. So
tissue, organ, yep.
Yes, organelles. And so the evolution goes from one to many and back to the one when those many become cohesive and coherent in their communication. So he says we're at this critical point now where these diverse points of view and these various forms of humanity are trying to come together to form a colony, a cohesive organism.
Yes, indeed.
And he says so it goes from, the single cell to the many cells come together, form the organs come together, then form a multicellular organism. They come together to form communities. These communities form then cities and then countries. So we're at the critical state where we're trying to unify as a planet, right? So we're getting all these many and this was a point of epiphany for me when he said, what happens when we become the singularity as a planet?
Yes, exactly.
We hook up with other planetary civilizations to keep progressing on this movement of evolution that goes from the one to the many to the one to the many. Does that make sense? Do you know where I'm getting?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. So, basically, what you have in Ken Wilber's lingo is a holarchy, that there continues to be increasing complexity, as well as, Ilya Prigogine talks about that as well. An organization and then a disorganization, a move into chaos, where we could think of it as a move into the void temporarily, and then a step forward into a higher level of intelligent organization of monocellular to multicellular organisms, and it would go from, you could really think of it as from an atom to a molecule to a cell to tissue to an organ to a human being, which is, as you said, and as we both have learned from Bruce, a community of cells, of organisms. And then, yes, if all humans became its own singularity, then what's our next step is really what you're pointing at. And absolutely, that is a total epiphany.
When the planet becomes a singularity, it looks for other singularities to merge with. That is evolution. And when we merge...
Right.
Yes. No, what was I saying?
No, I was just going to say, then we become a colony inside of another colony, and the process continues infinitely forward.
Right, but we're at that critical state where are we going to come together coherent in a...
Cohesive.
Cohesive,
coherent and cohesive,
interactive place, or are we going to fight each other for control, domination, all those things that have been in the way of Western civilization, or do we have a chance to now let go of our differences and come into a singularity that will then create the colonization, the colonies, the group mind that will then reach across time and space, particularly space, to reach other civilizations that are already colonized, a coherency of their being and thinking into a collective awareness so they can merge what we are emerging out of. And that's the point of history that we're at now.
And absolutely. And in fact, some of us feel that we can even hear them calling. And they are, how do I put it, both patiently and impatiently waiting for us to get our act together so we can get on with the larger universal picture,
Right, they are. Some people have heard their calling, absolutely. And some people have refused to hear the calling or ignored it or didn't fit into their culturally derived paradigm. So the war is what Terence McKenna is against culture. It's like we need to break the boundaries of our perception, and that's really why I call my show New Realities, because reality isn't what it used to be,
Exactly. As Yogi Berra has said, reality isn't, and the future isn't what it used to be either. So, listen, Alan, this has been completely... It's been completely delightful to have you on today and to talk about things that are near and dear to your and my hearts, and something that we spent so much time on and continue to collaborate together and in our in our tribes, so to speak, to
move
consciousness to another level.
Yogi Berra quote. Another Yogi Berra says, you can learn, you can observe a lot by just watching. That's what Yogi Berra said.
And on that note, Alan Steinfeld, thanks so much for being on today and all the good work you've been doing for a long time.
Is my website.
Yep.
NewRealities.com. And
beautiful.
My YouTube.com/New Realities. Look for my Indiegogo campaign about human destiny and the return of ancient wisdom. I look forward to having you on my show, Mitchell. I'm on BBS Radio as well, Tuesdays and Monday nights on Manhattan Cable. Channel, whatever it is now. Okay.
Good.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Right, exactly. Absolutely, Alan. Just really a pleasure. Keep up the great work. It's brilliant.
All right. I will see you soon. Thanks for having me.
That's right. Very soon. You bet. I'll be on your New Realities, providing a new reality for new realities very soon. Absolutely.
Okay, good. Good.
Thanks
for
again.
Everything.
Bye-bye now.
Okay.
Sure. Bye-bye now. Alan Steinfeld, my dear friend and colleague for many, many moons. Even before the New Age began, Alan and I were cavorting with each other and stimulating new thought in each other's mind, body systems. And it continues on. Believe me, it continues on. So thank you all for joining me today. Remember to get on our newsletter in our linear interpretation of reality by going to abetterworld.tv and becoming part of our family, our community, A Better World community. And this is the time of giving. This is the time of year. So if you have it in your heart and your wallet to share anything that is affordable to you is of great, great service to us. On our website, there is a donate button. Any amount truly appreciated. It really helps us with our interns and all those who are so willing to share their time and their effort and their energy with us so we can continue to bring these shows to you every single week. Now, for those of you who are listening right now, in fact, we are on the cusp of turning to A Better World TV, which is on MNN. Right now, I'll be interviewing. It's actually a classic interview of my interview with Bearhart, a very well-known, wonderful Native American elder talking about such, and I want to invite you to listen in on that too if you're with us right now. So on that note, thanks so much for joining me this week, and for those of you who are in New York who would be interested in the Heaven on Earth workshops, contact me at 212-420-0800. We're meeting this Thursday on the 18th and every other Thursday at 7 to 9 p.m. downtown. For details, call that number, 212-420-0800, or email me at mjr@abetterworld.net, mjr@abetterworld.net, where I always love to hear from you anyway, your comments and experiences of our shows. On that note, I thank you again for being part of it, and I look forward to seeing you all next